Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it correct. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and I'm delighted that you're joining me here today. And as we get started and delve more into maybe a little bit about issue 1 here in Ohio, the greater aspect of issue 1, which I'm going to discuss today, is related to whose image? Whose image? What does it mean to have an image? What is reflected in an image? And I'm not talking about any type of art, or maybe I am. The perfect art, if you will. And what does it mean to be a reflection of that perfect art? What got me going on this? We're going to touch that in a moment. But first off, I do want to say, and I'll discuss this a little bit more when we talk in maybe the second segment, I think it'll be most appropriate, will be about the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Just a little bit of heads up in that commentary that we'll do here in the second segment is that for all of those who are weak-kneed, all you pastors, all you Christians that are weak-kneed about Christian nationalism, after doing a quick study on Mike Johnson, I have to say you're looking at the epitome of Christian nationalism in reality. Christian nationalism in action. But Mike Johnson, do a little homework on him. And I'll help you out on that homework when we get into the second segment. But what got me going on this idea of image in relationship to issue 1, Hamas, and a lot of what else is happening in this political environment? I got thinking of in the image of. I have to tell you that was brought to me in a way that I was surprised of, quite frankly, when I was researching things to talk about. And I have to say, last week, again, I apologize for that being rerun programs, but we did have a family emergency, as I noted, and this week also we have a family emergency, but thankfully my sister has come up to help out with that, and she's doing a fantastic job in all that she is putting her expertise to in helping out as we work through things together. Now, back to this idea of image. In whose image? Now, everybody is the reflection of somebody or something. And how this resonates or should resonate with you, especially as it transitions and is meaningful in the political realm, goes to what I was reading here in The Biblical Structure of History by Gary North. And this particular paragraph really grabbed me as he was talking about God's perfect creation. And what does that mean in the form that God spoke before anything was? So language is absolutely critical. And we're going to see how that is when it relates into law, when it relates into constitutional amendments, when it relates into how we deal with each other and everything else that goes on. It's all based on language and understanding that, and the fact that God spoke the cosmos into existence. I took that, and as I moved into the next paragraph, when he spoke Adam into existence, and he formed Eve and spoke her into existence. So I'm quoting here, in this passage from Genesis 1, we learn that God spoke to Adam and Eve. And God said unto them, and he revealed to them that they were made in his image. So there was the first revelation, an idea of reflection for humanity being made in the image of God. This is what gets discombobulated, if you will, through the rejection of God, and now man trying to create humanity in his own image. We're definitely going to talk about that when we look at issue 1, we look at Hamas, we look at some UN Charter information as well. But let's look at this again. He revealed to them that they were made in his image. They reflected him. One of the ways which they reflected God is in that they understood God's language. When you ponder these things, as much as you may have read scriptures, but ponder that we have a capacity to understand God's language. They could understand what he told them. This made them responsible to him. So when we just look at that context alone on language and image and how is that from a reflective perspective, then I began this work in the image of, because I was challenged on what we need to do with it. Seriously, what I asked the question is, I wanted to consider that we are created in the image of a biblical God, but that rejection that I already mentioned of that living God by Adam and Eve brought us into this distortion, this distorted imagery, not only of ourselves, but of language. And that distortion was interesting even in the consideration by the Anti-federalists. You're shaking your head. You're going, whoa, you threw your arms up in the air. Whoa, Tom, how did the Anti-federalists look at this? What you're talking about here is a distortion of mankind from the image of God, from addressing the Constitution and assessing the Constitution of 87. Let me help you out there a little bit. So here's a quote I want you to listen to, and you can go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net, see it, read it there in the newsletter. So the evils of anarchy have been portrayed with all the imagery of language in the growing colors of eloquence. Stop right there and analyze that. That's what happened in the Garden of Eden. The devil spoke the language of God because he was a created being of God as well. And what he did is he portrayed the imagery of language with eloquence to the idea he was able to deceive them and saying they'd be like God. So there is the setup that I want you to be very clear on, is the setup of everything that happens in law, government, humanity, is that definition of the imagery, as well as what Gary North wrote on the reflection of who we become the image of. What are you the image of? I have to say, from reading the background of Mike Johnson, he is, as all Christians are, becoming that imagery of Christ, exercising that which God has determined in law, in reference to people, in reference to society. His voting record is very clear on that. So he goes on here, is this writer of the Anti-Federalist paper, continues with, the affrighted mind is thence led to class the new Constitution as the instrument of deliverance. We have that going on right now. People are clamoring out there, Constitution, Constitution, Constitution. And yet we have so many that are subverting the Constitution. And here in Ohio, they're also trying to subvert it and destroy the essence of constitutionalism by this Issue 1 amendment. It's not an instrument of deliverance. Deliverance only comes from one place. And as the only avenue to safety and happiness. Can't be. Constitution doesn't do that. It establishes parameters. To avoid the possible and transitory evils of one extreme. It is seduced into the certain and preeminent misery necessarily attended on the other. Well, they're once again, Satan was saying that about God's language, God's presence, God's reflection, his imagery. A state of anarchy from its very nature can never be of long continuance. The greater its violence, the shorter the duration. Order and security are immediately sought by the distracted people beneath the shelter of equal laws and the statutory restraints of a regular government. And if this be not attainable, absolute power is assumed by the one or the few who shall be more enterprising and successful. We're seeing that in the present administration. We saw that set up in the Obama administration. We see that set up with the leftists in general. If anarchy, therefore, were the inevitable consequence of rejecting the new Constitution, it would be infinitely better to incur it. For even then, there would be at least the chance of good government rising out of licentiousness. That's why defeating Issue 1 is critical, because once it becomes that essence of every guiding principle constitutionally, it is impossible to get rid of that licentiousness. But to rush at once into despotism because there is a bare possibility of anarchy ensuing from the rejection or from what is yet more visionary, the small delay that would be occasioned by a revision and correction of the proposed system of government so superlatively weak, so fatally blind, that it is astonishing any person of common understanding should suffer such an imposition to have the least influence of his judgment. Still more astonishing to so flimsy and deceptive doctrine should make converts among the enlightened freemen of America, who have so long enjoyed the blessings of liberty. Now this is from the Anti-Federalist number 6, titled The Hobgoblins of Anarchy and Dissension Among the States, 1788 by Centennial. Now, this influencing that happens in this, you have to note that these growing colors of eloquence, they're well conceptualized towards the Constitution as the instrument of deliverance, delivering, giving security, giving that happiness. And the falsehoods that are coming along in all these different issues and different legislation out there is something that has to be looked at from a moral, principled perspective. So what's more important in this week's program is that in assessing the question of humans determining life or death, Issue 1, or Hamas, be it by abortion, distortion, or human anatomy, as well as Hamas, the eloquence of language and design of an imagery to which individuals are shaped into. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like you to do is take and consider this. Look at it in the depths of what this is meaning. Go and reference what I'm trying to bring you to in just this anti-federalist perspective. we have to look at this more intently than we have ever looked at things before. So come on back, because Sam Adams clearly understood this, and we'll talk more about Mike Johnson and what it means to have Christian nationalism as a Speaker of the House. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists got it right. In this segment, I want to take you into a little bit more information on what I was speaking to in respect of the Christian nationalism. Now, I looked up some information on Mike Johnson. And Mike Johnson from Louisiana, just a very interesting career. From my perspective, a good young man. And that since he was in the House somewhere around between 2019 and through 2021, he was the chair of the Republican Study Committee, which the Republican Study Committee, as I looked into it, is still one of the largest components or committees slash what do they call them, a caucus almost, within the Republican Party that holds to conservative values. Now, I'm also taking and going to have there for you, if you go to samueladamsreturns.net, a really good article from another congressman that actually speaks to what's been going on in that more of a truly Christian constitutionalist group within a conference. They're called a conference, not just a committee, but a conference. And that what they're doing is that they have established groundbreaking activities. And as we heard from the speaker and some analysis in that, they're really shaking the establishment up. And the establishment hates it. Worse than just the Democrats hating what's going on, it is those who come with especially biblical values and principles are despised. Now, one of the articles that I have here for you out of the Communist Wikipedia is that he is identified as a member of the Christian right fraction or faction of the Republican Party. So he's anti-abortion, against murdering babies. He wants to end the same-sex marriages. He called the Supreme Court decision on Obergefell and Hodge for it to be overturned and for medical marijuana to be extremely restricted. And he's referring to it as a gateway drug, which it is. I wanted to talk more, and in the newsletter, I give you a little flavor on magic and pharmakia and how those two are tied together from Rushdoony's Law and Liberty. I think it's important that if you have a copy of that, that you go look and read that chapter alone. Now, he signed on to different briefs, the amicus brief on Texas versus Pennsylvania in the Supreme Court, contesting the results of the 2020 election. He's definitely cultivated close ties to Protestant, as they call it, fundamentalism, fundamental groups. And he Answers in Genesis is a group that he's a part of, Louisiana Family Forum, Alliance for Defending Freedom, and Focus on the Family. So that's where Tony Perkins knows him from, the Focus on the Family. And before that, he worked with Focus on the Family or these other groups to represent churches, pastors, and congregants whose vision of religious freedom conflicted with government regulations. So he knows how to apply faith within the context of law, as well as in an understanding of political service. And what does that mean in the greater context of a political life? So it's going to be very interesting how he executes his speakership. This will be a true exercise in Christian nationalism from a top leadership position from a person that is in line to become president of the United States. If something happened to the president and vice president, the speaker is next in line. Critical, amazing, most interesting. I did not know a lot about him until we saw what occurred on Wednesday in his election, unanimous election to the speakership. I think that it is amazing and absolutely wonderful that we will see how he exercises his intent to bring to fruition good governance. What he does with the budget, how he takes and will stop continuing resolutions and force actual specific budgetary legislation. These are important. So these are the important aspects of what he needs to accomplish. So with that, I wanted to take and bring you up into just a little bit of who Mike Johnson is. His big, one of the things I wanted to bring out here as I'm moving through, he was a partner at Kitchen's law firm and a senior attorney and national spokesman at the Alliance Defense Fund. That is heavy lifting there, folks, heavy lifting. And he did quite a bit there in Louisiana in the marriage and standing strong against same-sex marriages. So just a couple other aspects that I think it's important for the listeners here in this programming to understand so that we can have expectations through our representatives to pay attention to what the speaker's agenda is and that they move through the process, especially those that are either rhinos or those that are establishment. Like my congressman is an establishment congressperson. He is in there and, he plays right along with the McCarthy machine and all of that. So we're gonna have to see how now Speaker Johnson takes on the task of moving this Congress forward into some good legislation. I wanted to just bring to your attention the idea of magic and how that fits from that biblical perspective on what does that mean in relationship to now the root of the program, and that being on whose image are we in. Now, it was an interesting study to try and drive down on what Rushdoony was talking about in that biblical perspective on magic and how did it fit from that Christian perspective and biblical perspective in particular, as it was used both from the context of drugs as well as it is in the context of law and so on. So this brought me back to the imagery and the manipulation of language and the manipulation of imagery. Because in essence, and I'm just going to take and highlight it here in these last few minutes, it's just so intense to really bring out the core nuances of what that is in one word, and try and help you understand that what we have in so many of the issues that are going on today are related to these not incantations, so to speak, or what you think of the Halloween type of magic that is portrayed out there, or the magic shows, which is deception, sleight of hand, use of language, all of that. And the highest levels of it would be in the use of drugs and in the use of devil worship. Now, in the use of drugs, what we're finding, and there's a number of different articles out there that I came upon as well, and there's one in particular that I'm referencing for you in the program at SamuelAdamsReturns.net, is related to the manufactured amphetamine that Hamas was taking to make them into the murderous zombies that they were on this attack in Israel. The dead Hamas fighters, terrorists, murderers, had these in their pockets. They were taking these so that they would have no conscience. And when you think about that tie, pharmakia, and that word being related to magic, interesting. Just interesting. So you have these murderers, terrorist murderers on drugs that are also tied to a humanistic, anti-true biblical God in Allah. And you start putting those various pieces together. And we're going to talk about in the third segment more on those that are the proponents, the purveyors of the issue here, issue 1, to amend the Ohio Constitution, in tying that together as well from that humanistic murderer magic pharmakia position. Because if you look at medicine, there's a portion of it that is doing exactly what God designed for us to come into the understandings of our bodies, understanding of what it takes to utilize the technologies, utilize the brains that He gave us to find solutions for various types of illnesses. Now, there's a lot there that I think can be better done, my personal opinion, by naturopathy, natural medical items out there, but there are some that are useful from a pharmacological manufactured drug perspective. It's all a matter of how it is applied. But not to get too far off here, is you have to look at the medical industry as it then ties in with the humanistic and what we talked about, the manipulation even of language, to all the money that is going to be made with the whole idea of trans and abortion and so on and so forth. So as I was taking and looking at what Rushdoony wrote, it's very, very interesting to then try and assess the ideas of magic, of what it is in relationship to, well, especially Old Testament perspectives. Magic, the attempt to exploit supernatural powers by reciting different incantations. Also in the Old Testament, it was drawn to take in going after divining, looking for spirits to answer what God alone can only answer. And it had great penalties to it and what it meant to defy God's laws, principles, and His image. So what we look is the terminology, multiplicity of terminology used in the bans that testify that magic was a pervasive problem in Israel and the Israelite world. Now, however, that seems to be interesting, and we're looking primarily at Deuteronomy. We have to say that it is inclusive of child sacrifice. We're going to tie that all together a little bit more as we get into the last segment. And not that I was trying to ramble, But what I'm trying to say is that you have to get a good perspective on this. And to do that, I would point you once again to Rushdoony's book. I'd point you to commentaries basically like with Doug Wilson. But most of all, we're going to reflect on it from our founders' era. Come on back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-federalists got it right. I wanted to give you a little bit more direct perspective from Rushdoony on this idea of magic. And the fundamental that I really want to drive to is the tyrannical scientific state. Now, as you recall, I've been talking to you about the scientific method in politics, in which we've seen since the early 20th century, and how that has been applied in the public arena for governance and that. Well, to that extent, what that is defined as, and within the context of Rushdoony particularly explaining that that is the essence of what happens with magic from the rejection of biblical truth and God. So it's all about, at that point, finding the knowledge other than what is the biblical revealed of knowledge. And it's an attempt to become God over all things and to assert man's power and control over all reality. Now, that was the promise of Satan, was that to Eve was the promise that, eat from that fruit and you'll be like God. That was the deception. That was the working of words. That was the moving upon her, and then how she took and persuaded, again, language, Adam to also sin. And, when you look at it, there's a Kirk Koch that talks about the threshold of human history stands the command of God to replenish the earth and subdue it. But then, as I already said, Satan corrupted all of that via the temptation that he did. And the interesting aspect that what Rushdoony takes and pulls together for us and all of that is, there's a good way that God wants us biblically to seek knowledge. But at the same time, it becomes perverse under the way that Satan brings it to bear, and mankind now brings it to bear with their own. I don't think the devil has to do a lot of work. Is that because man is made in the image of God, that to take and pervert the whole essence of everything that is in the creative order, including government, including science, including religion, that's what we're seeing. That's what we're living through. So one of the sentences in here is that the purpose of science can be summed up as prediction, planning, and control. So very interesting. So then with that, science is thus a basic and external part of the new politics, because their goals consider they are both clearly totalitarian. And we absolutely have seen that with the COVID exercise, the totalitarian activities, absolutely despotic, that have occurred in relationship to COVID. Just amazing to me that we haven't had the greatest fighting back in relationship to that. And I only want to take another minute here on this, and that is that when we look at scientific world is a controlled world, a world of experimentation, and valid experiments require a control of all factors. We're always looking for that. When we saw that in COVID, we see that in the scientific method for political science and so on. And as a result, a scientific society is a planned society, a society in which there is no liberty, because liberty is not possible in a situation of scientific planning. That is your 15-minute city. That is environmentalism. That is the whole course of what we want to consider when we look at that term of magic. Now, more to it, a lot more to it. I'm not going there, but I want to come back to language and imagery, because it's whose image are you made in? And I think that what we're going to see with Speaker Johnson is that we're going to see that imagery of his Christian beliefs coming to greater fruition as it is applied in governance and law. And when now we're evaluating Ohio Issue 1, this is where a key element is that these individual humans reflect the distortion, and I'm talking about the proponents, the purveyors of this constitutional amendment. They are distortions that are internationally humanistic. And what do I mean by that? Well, Hillary Clinton and the humanists in general believe and promote a heterogeneous concept. Remember the whole idea? It takes a village. That was Hillary's mantra, if you recall that. But what comes with that is a conundrum in relationship to the language, even in the international schemes of law. Well, what do you mean by that, Tom? What's going on when you're talking about that? So Hillary and her ilk were really compelling, and they are compelling in this particular amendment or in laws like it. And here's how it is. I'm going to bring you something that's from an international report. There is no definition of the family under international human rights law. I paused so that you think about that. According to a report on protection of the family prepared by the UN staff and released, this was a couple of years ago in this report, for the next session of the UN Human Rights Council, the report touches on the family, human rights, and social and economic development, and downplays the legally binding understanding of the family as the, quote, natural and fundamental group unit of society, end quote, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and international treaties that implicitly exclude same-sex relationships from the meaning of family and international law and policy. This report goes on to say the human rights bureaucracy tries to balance the long-standing understanding of the family that dates back to the founding of the United Nations and effectively defines the family for purposes of international law and policy with a progressive and aggressive attempt to expand the meaning of family in international law and policy to include same-sex relationship. The result is not entirely consistent. And now that expansion in new reports, which I don't have copies of yet, but I've seen flashes on it, is to include trans, because we're seeing what's going across in Europe, include every other form of deviancy, but amazingly, there still is holdout countries. So this above article came from the Center for Family and Human Rights, a UN report. There is no definition of family. The link is there in the newsletter, and this was put together in 2016. Now, what I want you to consider, and this is important to consider as we move through this connection between the issue 1 and the proponents of issue 1 and that of Hamas. I tied it together first from the drugs. I tied it together from the magic, if you will, in some respect, in that how they want the totalitarian control over every human and to destroy and have genocide of a totally different group of people, that being the Jews. So here's what I want you to look at it in respect to the abortion. It is a moral argument that can only be justly dealt with in the confines of those with distinctive moral grounding. That means the Christian community can sit there and discuss and debate on that moral perspective on abortion all day long. And it works there. But trying to go outside of that, when you talk about sexuality and gender bending and trans issues, that's just thrown into the wind of international human rights law. So these people with issue 1 are the ones that are going after parental rights and destroying further the concept of family all the way, not just in Ohio, but on an international basis. They want to set precedent to obviate, hide, magic, destroy, magic, traditional biblical definitions of the family. It was interesting as I continued to study in the different articles that I came upon in relationship to what was going on with this whole idea of the international point of view. And as I was going through not just a UN report on this, I looked at who were some of those people involved in 2016 making the comments and observations on this UN Human Rights Office and supporting, what was going on and trying to put together the various pieces on how to argue this. One of the organizations that I saw there that just went, whoa, that jumped right out, is none other than the Center for Reproductive Rights. The Center for Reproductive Rights is one of the key promoters of Ohio Issue 1. And in their report to the UN and their comments and the submission on the definition of the family to the UN, they had this to say. And listen closely to those that are in Ohio and have read through the language within Issue 1. And I want you to hear this. And this is Article 1 in their report. It says, individuals are the holders of human rights. In accordance with the International Human Rights Framework, although there are a number of human rights that relate to the family, the individual members of the family are the rights holders to whom states have specific legal obligations. States are obliged to ensure that all measures they take which relate to the family comply with the full range of rights afforded each individual. In this regard, states should not invoke protections of the family or traditional family values as a justification or excuse for infringing on each individual's ability to effectively exercise his or her human rights. When I read that, I just went, whoa! There is the language and why they do not use children or minors in the amendment that they're proposing to the Ohio Constitution. It comes right out of this first paragraph that they submitted to the UN in regards to the definition of the family, and that only individuals have rights, a family does not. Well, I thought that to be quite interesting. We know from a foundational perspective that our founding fathers, whether they were humanists or whether they were those that had that foundational Christian biblical background, they knew the importance of the family. They knew that the dynamics and they knew the order of design that God made for the family, which meant He put the total responsibility on the man to make sure that we exercise that in which we are created in his image to fulfill. Sam Adams understood that in the deepest ways. Many of the Anti-federalists understood that in the same way that Sam did. I hope this helps you understand it, and come on back next week when Sam Adams returns.